Frozen fingers clutch a silent baby. "Bread? Please?" Mara whispers. The words brittle against the rancher's stony glare. He assesses the child, then the mother, a look that chills Mara more than the wind. He reaches for the shotgun propped against the door. She doesn't know he buried his own baby in this very snow. The snow had swallowed everything, roads, fences, even the sound of life. A small town nestled beside the hills now seemed more like a frozen graveyard. Wind howled like wolves through the narrow pass. The air bit deep, merciless. At the very edge of the valley, where the land dipped low and trees stood bare against the sky, stood a lone ranch. Smoke drifted from its chimney, a thread of warmth in a world turned white. Mara stumbled toward it, barely standing. She was 24. Her lips were split and bleeding, her cheeks red from windburn. She held her infant daughter tight to her chest, wrapped in a thin shawl already crusted with ice. Her feet throbbed in soaked boots. Her fingers could not feel, but worse than her own pain was the stillness in the bundle she carried. The baby was quiet, too quiet. Mara had nothing left to feed her. Her body drained from cold and fear gave no milk. The child had stopped crying hours ago. Now she barely breathed. Belinda knew she. 3 houses ago, Mara had started knocking. The first told her to go away. The second pulled their curtain aside and let it fall without a word. The third had slammed the door with such force it rattled the porch. Now this was the last. A dim glow flickered behind frosted windows. Somewhere inside a fire burned. A miracle. She reached the door and knocked once. Then again, weaker footsteps. The door creaked open. A man filled the frame. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a lantern in one hand and a shotgun leaning against the jamb. His coat was patched, his face shadowed by stubble and silence. But his eyes, gray, quiet, unreadable, eyes that had seen storms and survived. Mara's voice cracked as she spoke, breath hitching from cold and desperation. "I'm just asking for a piece of bread," she said. "Enough to make milk for my baby, please." The man didn't answer. His eyes flicked down to the child in her arms. Then he turned slightly as if about to head inside. That single motion nearly broke her. "No, wait!" Her voice cracked into a sob. She dropped to her knees on the porch, snow soaking through her skirt, tears spilled hot against frozen cheeks. "Please take the bread. Take her," she cried, lifting the baby with both hands. "I just want her to live." She bowed her head, ashamed of the words, but they came anyway. "You can keep her," she whispered. "She deserves a warm home. I can't give her that." "I've tried." There was no theatrics in her pleading, no drama, just the raw sound of someone who had nothing left to bargain but her own child inside. The fire crackled faintly. The man, Kalen Voss, stood unmoving for a long moment. Then he stepped forward. Without a word, he slid the shotgun aside and pulled off his heavy coat. Kneeling, he wrapped it around the mother and baby, tucking the folds gently beneath Mara's chin. His hands were rough, but careful. He didn't meet her eyes. Then he stood, turned back, and pushed the door open wide. Mara blinked up at him, stunned. He said nothing, just waited. Her legs barely obeyed. But when she staggered, his arm came beneath hers, steadying, helping, guiding her across the threshold. Warmth hit like a flood. Inside, the fire was real. The heat made her knees go weak. She stumbled, and again he caught her. He led her to the hearth and crouched beside her, unwrapping the baby with practiced hands. The infant stirred weakly, her lips moving. Mara pressed her face to the child's head, sobbing in relief. Behind her, the door closed. Outside, the wind screamed, but it could not touch them now. Mara sat close to the fire, her body still shivering despite the heavy coat draped over her shoulders. Her wet dress clung to her skin like a second layer of ice, and her fingers trembled as she tried to rub life back into them. Her boots, soaked through, lay abandoned by the door. Her breath came in shallow pulls, part exhaustion, part disbelief. Beside her, baby Lainey lay bundled in a soft blanket on a folded quilt. The infant made no sound, only the faint rise and fall of her chest, confirming she was still breathing. Her skin had lost its pink. Now it hovered between gray and blue. Mara's throat tightened. She pulled her knees up to her chest, trying to warm herself with her own body heat. The warmth of the room was there. She could feel it, but it felt far away, like something remembered from a life she no longer lived. From the back of the cabin came the clink of metal, then the scrape of wood against cast iron. The man, Callan, returned a moment later. He moved without haste, without any sound of annoyance or urgency, just a quiet presence, like the wind through pine. He set a small bowl of thin porridge on the table next to her. Steam curled gently from it, carrying a hint of oats and salt. Then without a word he placed a cloth bundle beside it. 3 folded diapers, threadbare, but clean. He crouched beside the baby, his hand braced against the floor for balance. He didn't touch her, just watched. His expression wasn't cruel, but it wasn't open either. His face, like the land outside, bore the marks of long winters. His eyes were unreadable, but not cold, more like a man who had seen too much, been asked too much. Mara reached for the bowl, her fingers stiff and slow. It slipped in her grip, nearly tipping. She steadied it with both hands and brought it closer to her lap. The first spoonful burned her cracked lips, but she didn't stop. "I didn't mean to give her away," she said softly. Her voice wavered, barely a breath. "I wasn't abandoning her. She looked down at Lainey, tears threatening. "I just wanted her to have a chance. A warm place, a full belly. That's all." The man didn't reply. He simply watched the infant, eyes narrowing slightly. Then something flickered behind them. Memory, a fire, a different winter, a smaller body. Years ago, this very room had seen another fight for life. His son, Finn, only weeks old, burning with fever. Callan had stayed up all night feeding the fire like a man possessed. Snow had sealed the door shut, the road gone, the doctor unreachable. He'd knelt beside Finn's cradle, breath held every time the boy wheezed. He'd whispered prayers to a God he wasn't sure was listening. And before even that, his wife, pale and bleeding, gone within hours of birth. No cries, no warning, just silence. He'd buried her behind the barn, the shovel slipping in frozen ground, held Finn with shaking arms, and made a promise that the boy would live, even if he had to burn down the world to make it so. Callan blinked. The fire snapped. The scent of smoke and wool settled between them. He looked at Mara now, truly looked, and in her hunched shoulders, in the way she hovered over her child with every ounce of herself, he saw what no words could express. This wasn't desperation born from selfishness. It was the kind born from love, raw and wild. She glanced at him and for the first time saw something more than caution in his gaze. She saw grief in knowing he stood slowly and walked to the wash basin, wet a towel with warm water, and brought it back, pressing it gently into her hands. Still he didn't speak. Mara stared at the cloth, blinking fast. "Thank you," she said. So he gave only a small nod before retreating to another room, the sound of his boots heavy on the wooden floor. But something had changed. She felt it, a soft shift. A door cracked open. She looked around the room, a pair of small boots by the hearth, a wooden horse tipped on its side, a patched blanket draped over a second rocking chair. This house had known the sound of a child, and maybe, just maybe, it could again. The first thing Mara noticed when she awoke was warmth, not just the blanket over her, or the fire still crackling, but the way the cold no longer sat heavy in her bones. The baby lamb lay wrapped in layers near the hearth, her cheeks pink, her tiny lips slightly parted in sleep. For a moment Mara could hardly believe it. She sat up slowly, her joints aching, her clothes stiff from the dampness of days past. But her baby was warm, breathing easier. Someone had moved them in the night. The man. Kalenchi turned toward the kitchen. He was already at the stove pouring something into a tin bowl. He glanced over once, then slid the bowl across the table. Supper or maybe breakfast. Mara could not tell anymore what time it was, only that the food smelled faintly of potatoes and herbs. She whispered, "Thank you." He gave a slight nod, then stepped into the hallway and returned with a folded sweater, wool, worn, but still soft. He set it gently beside her, not meeting her eyes. That night, he placed an extra log on the fire before retreating to his room. The next morning, Mara woke to the sound of hammering. She followed the noise to the side of the house and found Callan outside, reinforcing the window shutters to her room. The wind had rattled them all night, and now he was sealing the gaps with thick wood slats. did not look at her, just kept working. She watched a while, then returned inside, heart fuller than she wanted to admit. Each evening brought more quiet acts of care. A bowl of hot broth left near the bed, clean linens folded neatly, a cracked ceramic cup filled with warm water, placed where she could reach it in the night. He never asked questions, never intruded, but he noticed. When Leniani fussed, he would glance over, subtle concern flickering across his otherwise unreadable face. When Mara winced, walking across the cold floor, he slid a pair of woolen socks near the hearth without a word. By the fourth day, the silence between them no longer felt heavy. It felt safe. One evening, as the wind howled outside and the fire danced long shadows across the room, Mara turned to him. Her voice was small but steady. "My name's Mara." She paused, then looked down at the bundle in her arms. "Her name is Leniani." He didn't speak right away, just looked at them both. Then Callan, just that, nothing more. And it was enough. She nodded later. As she tucked Laney in, she noticed something new. The quiet wasn't hollow anymore. It held shape. It had weight. For so long, silence had meant loneliness. Cold stares, closed doors. But here it was different. There was no judgment, no demand, only space. For the first time in what felt like forever, Mara didn't feel like a burden. She didn't feel in the way. She felt allowed. Callan sat by the fire, carving something into a small block of wood. She watched from across the room, the baby asleep in her arms. He wasn't a man who needed to speak. His hands did that for him. Every bowl of soup, every extra blanket, every window fixed without being asked. And in that, Mara understood something. This man, this stranger, was giving her more than food or shelter. He was giving her a chance. The fire crackled quietly. Outside, snow pressed against the windows, thick and heavy, muffling the world beyond. Inside, Mara sat hunched on the wooden chair near the hearth, her arms wrapped around Lanny, who slept tucked against her chest. Callan sat at the edge of the table, whittling a piece of wood, the knife in his hand moving with slow precision. He did not speak, but she could feel his presence steady beside her. "I should tell you," she whispered, not looking up. "Why I came, why I was willing to give her away for bread." Kaylin's hands stilled. She took a breath. "His name is Roy, my husband. Or was." Callan looked at her then, eyes dark, unreadable. "He used to be kind," she continued. "Before the war, he brought me flowers once, sang off key at our wedding, held me when I was sick." The memories caught in her throat, turning bitter. But when he came back, he wasn't Roy anymore. Not really. The war took his voice and gave him rage. He drank to silence the noise in his head. When he couldn't drown it, he let it out. Her hand moved over Laney's back instinctively, protectively. He would throw things, scream, but he never touched me until after Lanny was born. She paused. That night it was snowing hard, a storm just like the one outside now. Laney was crying. I was half asleep. I heard his footsteps, heard him say he couldn't take it anymore. Her voice broke. I got there just in time. He was standing at the open door, Laney in his arms. He looked at me and said, "Maybe she'll learn silence if the cold takes her." Callan's hand gripped the edge of the table. I didn't think. I just moved, took her from his hands and ran. No shoes, no coat, just a blanket and fear. I didn't stop until the town was gone behind me. Mia looked up, finally meeting Callan's eyes. I've been walking ever since. The silence stretched. She waited, expecting judgment, expecting the sound of boots crossing the floor to show her out. Instead, Kin turned slowly toward the hearth. He reached for a split piece of cedar stacked beside the kindling, took his knife and carved into it. The scratch of blade on wood was the only sound. Then he set the plank beside the fire, the words facing her. I understand. Mia blinked, her lips parted, but no sound came. Something inside her unclenched. Not completely, but enough. Across the room, a soft rustling broke the stillness. Finn had woken and padded into the space with sleep-heavy steps. His hair was toasted, his small arms wrapped around a threadbare blanket. He looked at Mara, then at the baby. Without hesitation, he crossed the floor and sat on the rug in front of the fire. Can I hold her? He asked, eyes bright. Mia hesitated, startled as she's little. but Finn was already reaching up gently. Callan moved to help, guiding the newborn into his son's lap with surprising ease. Finn cradled her carefully, legs crossed. "She's really small," he whispered. "She is," Mara said softly. He looked up, his voice full of innocent pride. "Papo says babies only cry when their bellies are cold. I can keep her warm. Is that okay?" Mama knew. Mia froze. Her heart skipped. Colleen stopped moving. The room seemed to still entirely. Finn's face was open, pure. Either adult answered, not right away. They looked at each other, Mara and Ken caught in that fragile moment. Both breathless. Neither dared speak, as if words might shatter it. But in their eyes was something unspoken, a kind of understanding neither of them had asked for. Yet both needed. Finn grinned, proud of himself, and leaned closer to Laniani. She stirred in his arms and made a soft cooping noise. Not a cry, just peace. Mara blinked hard, swallowing a lump in her throat. She hadn't known warmth like this still existed. Hadn't known a child could speak the very words her heart was too broken to shape. Kaylin reached for another log and tossed it into the fire. The flames rose gently, casting light over the faces of the two children curled together on the rug. And for the first time in years, Mara Lark did not feel like a woman on the run. She felt like she was home. It happened one quiet morning, just as the frost was beginning to lift off the porch rails. Mara was hanging linens in the pale winter sun when a voice called out from the edge of the fence line. "Mirror," she turned, heartbeat leaping. A man sat atop a dappled horse, broad-shouldered, grim-faced, wrapped in a worn overcoat with travel dust still clinging to his boots. "I knew it was you," he said, guiding the horse closer. "I'd heard rumors, but I didn't believe it till now." Mara took a step back, instinctively shielding Laney, who was strapped to her chest in a sling. "You don't remember me, do you?" he continued. "Name's Whit. I knew Roy. I knew you. I know you." He gave her a long, judgmental look. "You ran off with his kid." Mara's breath caught. "I didn't save it," Whit cut in. "You disappeared in the middle of the night with his child. That's what people say. You're lucky it's me who found you and not the law." He turned his horse slightly. "But it will be. Roy's family has money. They'll send letters. They'll press charges. That baby ain't yours anymore. Not after what you pulled." Then he turned and rode off, without another word, back toward the hills. By nightfall, the letter came. A writer passed through, handed Callan a folded envelope without dismounting. It was from Roy's older brother, stamped and sealed with his family's crest. "We've been informed that our niece is being held under unlawful circumstances. This will not be ignored. Return the child or face legal consequence." Mara stood by the fire, shaking, the paper trembling in her hands. "They're coming," she whispered. "They'll take her from me. I should have run further. I shouldn't have stayed." She moved toward the door, grabbing the small cloth bag she'd tucked under the stairs. Callan blocked her path. "You don't understand," she said, voice cracking. "They'll say I'm mad that I abandoned Roy, that I'm unfit. I don't have papers. I don't have witnesses. I don't have anything." Her eyes burned with panic. "I can't lose her." Callan stood silent. Then he turned toward the wall, opened the cabinet by the stove, and took down a long wooden box. From inside, he pulled a rifle. He checked the chamber, loaded a round, and rested it across his arm. Then, in a gravel, deep voice that scraped from a place rarely used, he said, "You're not going anywhere." Mia blinked, stunned. "I won't let anyone take your child," he continued. "Or you." His voice was low but solid, and for the first time since she'd met him, she realized just how much weight he could carry behind silence. Aylin stepped forward, placed the rifle near the door, and turned to her. "They can send letters. They can send men. Let them," he said, "but they won't get past me." Mara felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but from something else. Something like safety. "I can't ask you to do that," she whispered. "You didn't ask," he replied simply. Laney stirred against her chest, letting out a small, soft whimper. Mia looked down at her child, then back at Kaylin. He was already moving, tightening the latch on the window, double-checking the locks, reinforcing, blaring, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Mara sank into the nearest chair, burying her face in her hands. Kulin knelt beside her, not touching her, not speaking. Just there, steady, like a wall she never knew she could lean against. And outside, the wind began to rise. The sun was low when it happened, dripping orange over the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the yard. Mara was inside, rocking Lainey near the hearth, humming a half-forgotten lullaby, the kind her mother used to sing. The house was still quiet, too quiet, until the distant sound of hooves shattered it. She rose slowly, clutching Lainey to her chest. Through the front window, she saw the figure thin, slumped in the saddle, swaying with each step of the horse. Her breath caught Roy. He rode like a man half dead, but his eyes burned with something feral. His coat flapped in the cold wind, and a pistol hung loosely from his belt. When he reached the porch, he didn't dismount. He shouted, voice slurred but sharp. "Mara, I know you're in there." She backed away, heart hammering. "Open the damn door. You think you can just run off? Take what's mine? My wife? My kid?" Lainey whimpered. Mara held her tighter, panic rising. Roy dismounted with a stumble, staggered up the steps, and began pounding on the door with his fists. "You don't get to disappear. You don't get to hide." Mara looked around wildly. Callan wasn't home. He had taken Finn into town that morning. Something about a fever. There was no one else. She grabbed a chair and wedged it beneath the door handle. Her fingers shook as she fumbled with the lock, but it was too late. Roy roared, shoved his shoulder into the wood. The door cracked. With a final shove, it burst open. Mara screamed. He stormed inside, eyes wild, reaching for her. "You're coming with me," he hissed, grabbing her wrist. "Both of you." "No," she cried, twisting away, shielding Lainey with her body. He yanked her roughly. The baby wailed. Mara fell to her knees, clutching Lainey like a shield. And then, hoof beat tats, fast, heavy. The front gate slammed open. Colin. He jumped from the saddle before the horse had even stopped. The moment he saw the splintered door, the chaos inside, he moved. Silent. Cold. Exact turned just in time to draw his pistol. The shot rang out. It missed. Hit the doorframe with a crack. Colin didn't miss. His bullet struck Roy in the shoulder, spinning him backward with a howl. He collapsed to the floor, bleeding and cursing. Callan stepped forward, expression unreadable. Rifle steady. Roy tried to crawl toward his gun. Colin kicked it away. He said nothing. Just knelt, bound Roy's wrist behind his back with a length of leather cord, then dragged him out into the yard. Roy thrashed, screamed, but Colin was a wall of calm. He tied the bleeding man to his own saddle, mounted his horse, and rode straight for the town. The ride was slow, deliberate, and the town was watching. By the time Callan reached the main street, people had gathered. Shopkeepers stepped outside. Mothers hushed their children. The sheriff stood waiting on the steps of his office. Callan dismounted, pulled Roy from the horse, and let him drop to the dirt. Then he looked around. His voice, rough and graveled, carried through the hush. "This man threatened to kill a child," he said simply. The crowd murmured. One man spit into the dust. A woman gasped and covered her mouth. The sheriff knelt, checked Roy's wound, then looked at Callan and gave a grim nod. "Well, take it from here." They hauled Roy to his feet. He cursed all the way, but no one listened. As the townsfolk began to disperse, a woman, owner of the dry goods store, turned to her neighbor and muttered, "No wonder she ran." Mia stood far off just beyond the rise, Lainey in her arms. Colin looked up and found her eyes. He didn't smile, just gave her a quiet nod. She returned it, tears clinging to her lashes. By the end of the week, the wind in town no longer whispered scandal. It carried something else. Respect, maybe even regret. Word of what had happened at the Voss Ranch spread faster than fire and dry brush. The tale grew as it passed from porch to parlor. How Callan Voss, the silent widower, had ridden into town with a bound man bleeding from the shoulder, declaring him a danger to a mother and her child. How the townsfolk had watched the law haul Roy Lark away, while Mara stood on the outskirts, her baby clutched to her chest, her face pale but unflinching. People who once crossed the street to avoid her now nodded as she passed. The same mouths that had muttered behind cupped hands offered cautious greetings, sometimes even a smile. At the general store, Mrs. Halverton, the butcher's wife, approached Mia without hesitation. She pressed a parcel into her hand, soft, wrapped in a clean square of muslin. "Reed and lard," she said quietly. "For the little one." Mia blinked in surprise, her fingers clutching the warm bundle. "Thank you." The woman just nodded and walked away. Eyes flicking briefly to Lanani, nestled in the sling across Mara's chest. A few days later, as the snow began to pull back from the fence posts like tide from shore, the widow Claiborne trudged slowly up the ranch path, her gait stiff, her shawl pulled tight. She said nothing as she sat down a cloth sack on the porch, only nodded once sharply before turning to leave. Mia stepped outside just in time. "Ma'am," she called. The old woman paused, one hand on the gate. "Where are we going?" Mia asked, voice soft. The widow didn't turn. Her shoulders rose and fell with a quiet sigh. "Because it ain't the baby's fault, and it sure as hell ain't yours." Then she was gone, her boots crunching down the path. Inside the sack, Mara found warm, knitted blankets, a jar of amber honey, a tin of salve for cracked skin, and at the very bottom, a hand-sewn baby bonnet made of soft blue cotton with tiny white stitches along the edge. Mia held it to her chest, suddenly unable to breathe. Inside the ranch, Kalan spoke little, but his hands worked like prayers. He reinforced the fence line with new cedar posts, even as the cold bit his skin raw. He hammered the barn shut with a double latch, mended the broken hinges on the cellar door, and replaced the padlock on the front gate. Every action was quiet, precise, protective. One morning, Mia stepped out with Laney wrapped as snug in her arms. She stopped at the porch steps. Colin was crouched by the gate, sleeves rolled, cheeks red from the cold. He stood slowly as she approached, wiping his hands on a rag. Mounted on the gate was a wooden sign, hand-carved and simple. The letters were uneven, but deep of the three of us. Her breath caught. She didn't say a word, just stood there, clutching her baby close as something warm and fierce bloomed inside her chest. Then came the sound of boots thewing, Finn barreling out the front door like a windstorm. Blonde hair wild, cheeks flushed with joy. "Hey, Mama!" he shouted, flinging his arms around her waist. "Can we have bread and honey today?" Mara dropped to her knees, eyes full, one arm around Finn, the other holding Laney to her chest. She buried her face in Finn's shoulder and held on. He didn't wriggle free, didn't ask why she was crying. He just leaned into her like he'd done it 100 times before, like he belonged there. And maybe he always had. That evening, Mara sat on the porch as the sun bled gold across the hills. The snow was melting, carving little streams that whispered of spring. Callan joined her in silence. Behind them, laughter rang out, Finn's voice chasing shadows down the hall, Laney's soft coos close behind. Mara turned her face to the wind, and for the first time in years, it didn't sting. It felt like home. By early March, the snow had melted into soft, uneven patches along the hillside. The air carried the scent of thawing earth, damp pine, and the faint sweetness of sap rising in the trees. Ice, once thick on the windows, had loosened its grip entirely. The wind, once a howling threat, now came as a gentle breeze, brushing against the walls of the cabin like a familiar friend. Chickens scratched curiously at the thawed soil near the barn, clucking softly as if surprised to find the ground again. Smoke from the chimney curled into a pale blue sky. No longer a lifeline, just comfort. Inside, the cabin smelled of warm bread, cinnamon, and a trace of lavender from the dried sachet hanging above the hearth. Laney, now fuller in the cheeks and stronger in her kicks, lay in the handmade cradle Callan had sanded and reassembled himself. Each time Finn leaned over her with a picture book in hand, she kicked excitedly, gurgling and squealing, as if understanding every word Finn had taken to reading aloud, tracing the pictures with his stubby fingers, mimicking Kalen's deep, quiet voice. Once upon a time, he'd say with exaggerated seriousness, before breaking into giggles when Lanny reached out to grab the page. Callan, once silent as the snow drifts, now spoke in low tones more and more each day. The words came slowly, some stilted, some unsure, but always with care. He practiced them with Mara in the quiet hours after chores, sitting by the fire while she mended clothes or shelled beans. In the evenings, he read to Laniani, just a line or two from a book about farm animals or weather, but his voice was steady, rough, real. That morning, Mara stood alone on the porch, a worn mug of tea nestled between her hands. Her eyes roamed the wide land beyond the ranch, the fields greening softly, the trees on the hills dusted with the first hints of buds. It felt like breathing after holding your lungs still for months. The stillness wasn't heavy now. It wasn't the quiet that came with hiding or fear, and it was calm. It was peace. She heard the creak of the cabin door behind her, but didn't turn. She felt his warmth first, the familiar presence. She now trusted like sun after frost. Then his hand settled lightly on her shoulder. In his other hand, he held a small plaque smoothed around the corners, carved with careful hands. He offered it without a word. She took it and looked. The letters were imperfect, uneven in spots, but unmistakable. Family is something no one can take from you. She didn't cry. She'd shed enough tears in the cold, but she leaned back into him just enough to let his arms slide around her waist. "I believe that," she whispered. Later that day, they all sat on the front steps. Mara with Lainey bundled in her arms, Kaylin beside her, and Finn sprawled against his leg, a crust of bread in hand, sticky with honey. Lainey slept, one hand curled inside the collar of Mara's shirt. The sun spilled gold across the fields as it lowered behind the hills. No one spoke. They didn't need to. They had survived the storm. Not just winter, not just Roy, but the kind of storm that threatened to erase a person's place in the world. Now they simply were together. And enough. If this story stirred something in you, if you held your breath when she offered her baby for bread, if your heart clenched when he opened the door, and if by the end you believed in a kind of love that grows quietly between scars and silence, then this tale was meant for you. Hit that like button if you felt the weight and warmth of this journey. And don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories, where every week we bring you more tales of untamed hearts, fierce devotion, and romance carved into the dust and grit of the American frontier. Tap the bell so you never miss a story where love is louder than gunfire and home is built, not found. Until next time, ride safe and remember, even in the coldest storms, love is the fire that never dies.